Bibado, Bibado.
Hello everybody and welcome to the third episode of the Feeding Curiosity podcast. I am delighted to welcome our guest today, Christiana Scott. She is the founder of Real Food Littles, a health-focused personal chef, nutritional therapy practitioner and a passionate supporter of baby-led weaning. Christiana, a very warm welcome to the show. Please can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where your interest in baby nutrition began?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on today. It really all started where I was determined to kind of avoid some of the issues that I saw my personal chef clients have. There was just this common thread that they would all call me with these issues with eating where they had kids who were picky eaters and then one had an allergy, and it would just, the end result was the same, where meals were miserable for everyone, and then usually whoever was responsible for the food, which is generally in most families the mom, was cooking like multiple meals to sort of make dinner work for everyone. And it was just sort of this question of like, well, how does this get so out of control? So that's how I started learning more about baby-led weaning and sort of how different families approach starting solids and sort of tracing these issues really back to the beginning, and sort of starting on the right foot. And then, so I had this experience of sort of seeing other families go through this. And then on a personal level, we really struggled to have children. We went through a very long journey with IVF and recurrent miscarriage before finally sort of having a viable pregnancy that ended up being twins. We put in one embryo and it split, which was sort of like the surprise of a lifetime. But
I mean, I'm in that club as well. We're
right.
small cohorts. I understand
it's
that.
like quite a surprise on the ultrasound. But given my history, I was sort of in the unique position of like, I knew I had one shot to get this right, you know, and like to do it once with two children, and that was going to be it. So I was really committed to doing baby-led weaning, and I had seen the benefits. But when I actually got into the thick of it, I was sort of shocked by how challenging it was to just like feed the baby what you eat. It was just sort of like this flippant, oh, just like feed the baby what you're eating. And it's all like so easy and so lovely. But I had so many questions of like, well, what about the salt? And what about the spice and the honey and the texture? And like all of these things, it just seemed like all the things that I love to cook for my husband and I, it just wasn't that easy to adapt it, particularly from like 6 to 9 months where like they're just getting started and just kind of getting their feet wet with it. So it was just sort of this learning process and this aha moment of like how I had to really just think about cooking in a new way and adapt what I was cooking so that our twins could have it too and enjoy a really wide variety of foods without me losing my marbles as a parent and having to like make special little purees or special little cute like baby-led weaning for food for them, which I didn't have the bandwidth to do looking after twins in a pandemic. Yeah. You know, it's like when I had
you've got a limited pot of time that you need to make work for you. Yeah.
Right. So it's just like, there has to be, you know, a more manageable way to do this. And that's kind of what led me to starting Real Food Littles.
Yeah. So I mean, that's sort of the perfect introduction and to what we're going to discuss today, which is really how you can guide parents to do that. So it sort of brings me on to the first question was, so how do you adapt a meal to make baby-led weaning more manageable? You know, I'm definitely not Jamie Oliver, and you know, we've all got a limited pot of time. So yeah, what are your top tips for that?
Yeah, and what I always want to tell people is you don't have to be Jamie Oliver. I mean, you do not have to have that level of cooking skill or knowledge to make this manageable. So what I advise is you sort of have to come up with something that is reasonable for you, because if you try and like set the bar too high and like buy all this food and find all these recipes, and then it just like it feels overwhelming, and then if you don't get to it all, then you just sort of feel defeated. So I try and suggest to parents pick 2 meals per week that are things that you can easily adapt for the baby and make baby sort of baby friendly, with it also being something that adults would enjoy as well. So things like meatballs are really great that are soft, like sweet potatoes, soft vegetables. And there's lots of meals that we eat as adults that use those sorts of things. But if you can pick 2 per week, and then you can make extra of those as well, then that's a really good start of having a couple meals per week that you and your baby can enjoy together.
Yeah, I think that's, and I guess it also is sort of like parents with work and time that actually maybe it's not realistic for every family for every meal to sit down together. So having sort of those 2 a week or 1 to 2 a week that you've agreed, and then if you find that you are actually you've got more time, that you can always up it and not give yourself a hard time.
Because babies eat so little in the early days that if you cook those 2 meals, you'll have, even if there's not a ton left over necessarily for like adults or older children, like you can put little leftovers in tiny glass containers and have quite a bit to feed your baby for other meals that maybe you're cooking that are less baby friendly. You know, if you're really craving something super spicy that isn't appropriate, then you can have, you know, some home cooked, really great food in the freezer that you can pull out. And then it makes the whole thing a little bit less overwhelming to have that backup.
Yeah. So what I wanted to ask you about was sort of, obviously as baby gets older, the more the complexity of food that they eat is likely to increase, or their textures and things. So where would you start for sort of you're beginning your weaning journey? You don't want to cook 2 meals. So if you were cooking, what would you do at 6 months versus as they get a little bit older?
Well, at 6, when they're starting off, you're working with the bigger pieces of food. So sort of like 2 finger lengths wide, a finger length long. And it's totally appropriate at that age for a baby to have, 1 broccoli floret, 1 spear of sweet potato, and like 1 strip of steak or something, just really small portions. And then that can be dinner for the parents too, of having steak, sweet potato, and broccoli. And babies can eat a lot more in terms of like flavor and seasonings and stuff than we think. So it's sort of, the tide is really turned in terms of flavor and stuff. And it used to be, what adult wants to eat a completely plain sweet potato? Well, you don't have to. You can put seasonings on it, you can put butter on there and really make it tasty. It's like babies can handle a lot more in terms of like their palate than we have sort of been led to believe for a long time. Yeah. And then it makes it taste better for adults too. So.
Yeah. And I think if something's palatable to you, it's more than likely going to be palatable to your baby.
Right.
The like little chefs in the making. And then so when they sort of get to sort of 6 to 9 months, is there a big difference between what you should be doing at 6 months to 9 months in terms of adapting a meal?
There's not a huge difference there, because it's usually the shift in food size really comes when the pincer grass starts coming in. So that's why around the 9-month mark, we go down to like the smaller bite-sized pieces. And it's just sort of like this slow journey really of them increasing the sort of textures that they can manage, the foods that they can eat competently. And so it's really not until that pincer grass comes in kind of 8.5, 9 months that the food size will change. And it's just like an ever increasing sort of list of the foods they've tried and the foods that they can, manage with ease.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And so sort of moving on from there, babies, when they're very little, they do spend a lot of time squishing food up and not eating that much of it. And so how do we sort of avoid the waste? Because, at the moment food is getting more expensive.
Yes.
Everybody's feeling the pinch on that. So how can we try and avoid that sort of food waste? Because I think that's a lot of parents feel a bit frustrated if they've cooked something and then it ends up on the floor.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a couple things there. And this is, as you said, this is really top of mind for a lot of people. And particularly if you're trying to feed your baby things that are healthy, that those are sometimes going to be, some of those items are going to be a little bit more expensive. So you certainly don't want to waste them. And the first thing really is to understand how incredibly small the portions can be of like the first portion that you serve to your baby. So kind of like what I was mentioning, like like one small broccoli floret is plenty. Like you don't need to put like 5 little broccoli florets on the plate. So especially from like 6 to 9 months, like one of each, if you serve 3 foods, like one piece of each is plenty. And then if you're following, you know, Ellen Satter's like division of responsibility, which is sort of a well-known kind of really elegant way of thinking about the parent's role in feeding and the child's role in feeding, then if they want more of something, then you offer that, presuming you have like more of it cooked or whatever. So it's not that the baby's only going to eat that tiny amount. It's that if they decide they don't want any broccoli today, that you're not wasting that. So just being really, really intentional about starting small and then letting them have more if they want it. Because the other thing is sometimes a lot of food in front of a baby can be a bit overwhelming to them as they're just getting the hang of this eating concept. And when they're overwhelmed, they're much more likely to just grab it all and throw it, which is super irritating. For parents.
Yeah. And we've all been there.
Yeah, we've all been there.
We've all been
I'm not
there.
saying that this is like a cure-all. Like I think food throwing is just going to be like part of it at some point. But so both from a waste standpoint and from a throwing standpoint, like it helps to start really small. And then some other parents will do some sort of like a splash mat underneath. And that way, if that's clean and the food falls on there, then, if you're comfortable with it, then that can go back on the plate, with like less concern of, it hitting the floor and what might be on it at that point. So. Yeah.
And obviously, the product that that reason was the reason that the coverall came to be, the Bibado coverall became to be. And actually what I didn't realise before I created it was actually how much it was actually my nephew, he was sort of testing it, how much actually he just dropped just because his hand-eye coordination wasn't good enough. And it was all in the well. And then he rediscovered it. And so it was kind of like the meal.
It's like the kangaroo pouch.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something that I hadn't really appreciated at the time, that that would have ended up as food waste. So
right, absolutely.
So I was really surprised that, and my understanding of baby development wasn't as good as it is now, but that was a big benefit that they, I guess it's an engaging opportunity because the food is in a different place, so it makes it more interesting again to find it somewhere else.
Right. It's like a whole new item when they find it like tucked in their bins.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
totally.
And so any other tips on food waste? It's sort of obviously portion control, picking stuff up, or is that we kind of covered that one?
I think mostly, yeah. I think it's just you want to make sure that whatever food is being used at that meal is actually consumed by your baby, or to the best of, there's going to be like some mess and some on their face, but it's amazing how much can get wasted by it just like getting hurled on the floor because the portions were too big. So, yeah. And
do you have sort of a size? Because sometimes that's useful to sort of have in your mind of like what size might the item of food be sort of, is it kind of like a parent's thumb size or smaller, or
I would say a little bit bigger than that, like 2 fingers, like about this size is like about what you want. Because if it's too small, if it's too short or too thin, then it's really easy for a piece to break off, which isn't the end of the world. Like it's gonna happen, but it's a little bit more manageable if it's bigger in the early days. So I always tell parents, if you're unsure, it's better to go like bigger than smaller in the early days, even though that can be sort of like counterintuitive to parents, and every parents want to serve a 6-month-old like teeny tiny little pieces because it feels more comfortable, that just seems more, like that would be lower risk. And it's really hard for them to pick up, and B, can be a little bit more of a risk before they have the sort of oral development to be able to handle those smaller pieces and like manipulate those in the mouth. So bigger is better, definitely.
I like that. Bigger is better. That's a great tip. So I think the other thing that, parents worry about is sort of the nutritional content of a meal. And for me, it's sort of, you have a baby, you've fed them either formula milk or breastfed them, and you kind of haven't worried about nutrition. And then suddenly you have to start introducing solids. And that, I think, is a genuine concern to parents. Like, how do I know that I'm getting the right nutrition in? So I was wondering if you could give us any sort of tips about that to sort of reassure parents or give them some advice to help them?
Yeah. I think the thing to remember is that there are absolutely some nuances with baby nutrition. Like the notable one is that their iron needs are very high, like compared to how small they are. So that's really one to be on top of. But in general, in terms of like a balanced meal for a baby, it's really just a miniature version of what a balanced meal for an adult would be. So it's just a really easy way to do that is like some sort of like protein source. And that's generally hopefully going to be an iron rich one if possible. And then some sort of like fruit or vegetable. And then something else that's maybe like a starch or a higher calorie fat type thing. So sort of have like 3 elements to your meal that you're, doing your best to give them, a few different options to work with. But it's really, really common for a baby to maybe only eat like one of the 3 at the meal. And sometimes that can make parents really anxious of like, oh, well, all they ate was a sweet potato, or all they ate was X, or all they ate was the banana or whatever. But if you can think, if you're doing your best within reason, like this isn't going to happen all the time, to serve them like varied meals, sort of varied balanced meals, then over time, they're going to pick different things out of the meals and have a reasonably well-balanced meal over time. I mean, the only thing to be on top of it is if your baby, like every single meal, like rejects the iron-rich food or something, then that might be something you need to follow up with a little bit more. But in general, like often these things like kind of even out over the course of like a couple days. So to think of like, well, what has my baby had over the course of like a couple of days, as opposed to like, oh my gosh, they didn't really have a balanced meal for lunch today or something.
Yeah. And the other thing that, I guess might be worth bearing in mind is that introducing new flavors can take a while for a baby to eat it. So it's worth trying flavors or foods that they haven't tried and they maybe haven't eaten successfully on one day, but repeating that exposure to it.
Right. Because we know through research that babies can need multiple exposures to something before they learn to like it. So we're sort of training their palate in essence to sort of like learn to enjoy the foods that we cook in our family and the foods that we want them to learn to enjoy as well. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's maybe something I hadn't really thought about is that the more you broaden the diet early on, actually the better it is for them. It's just giving them more experiences, and when they're young, they're kind of up for it, aren't they? It gets harder as they get older because they do definitely get fussier. But I think when they're little, you've got kind of a bit of a golden window of opportunity, haven't you?
Yes, yeah, and the more you sort of like push their palate a little bit when they're younger, the more foods that they'll continue to like through the toddler years. So all little ones will drop off, like after a year, that some things that they liked as a baby, they'll decide that they don't like when they're older. But if they've had like a really wide variety when they're little, then, if there's 10 foods that they don't like or something as a toddler, but they have tried a whole bunch, then that's, it's not that onerous for you as a parent, and you still have a child that's eating well in their toddler years and beyond.
Yeah. And so does your course kind of address some of these things for parents?
Yeah, absolutely. So my course is called The Real Food Baby, and it really is there to help parents as a resource of not only kind of all the nitty-gritty details that you need to know about starting solids through baby-led weaning or making the transition to finger food for those who started on purees, but it really goes deep into how you can adapt your cooking and serve your little one the same foods that you're eating as the family so that the whole family eats really well. That was sort of like what I really felt was missing when I went through this process. So I sort of created what I wish I had, I guess, per se.
Yeah. No, I think it looks fantastic.
Yeah.
And I wish it would have been around, when my babies were little over 11 years ago now, which I can't believe. They're nearly teenagers.
Oh my gosh.
God, yeah, scary. Now, in the UK at the moment, I don't know whether we're having amazing weather. It doesn't happen very often in the UK, but it is hence me being very summery. So do you have any sort of tips for sort of meal planning for sort of summer food and when you're out and about with little ones? Because there's certain foods that are good and certain foods that are less good in the heat and when you're on the go.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, you always want to be a little bit more on top of food safety when you're feeding a baby than everyone, should be on top of food safety, but particularly with little ones, because their immune system is a little bit less developed. So they're a bit more at risk for getting foodborne illness than an adult would be per se. So just being really on top of having food in a cooler bag. So not letting it sit out too long at room temperature. So nothing should be at room temperature for more like 2 hours is really like the absolute outside. So it's really that room temperature middle range that in the culinary world, it's called like the danger zone. So you just want to make sure that like hot food stays hot and cold foods stays cold. So most of the time we're not having like hot food when we're out on a picnic or something. But and then, I mean, another consideration, I think, when you're out during the summer with a little one is there are certainly some foods that are messier than others. I remember like one time I took like a little container of hummus out with my boys and there was just like hummus everywhere. And I was like, okay, so maybe this is not like not the best thing, but
portable. It's not the portable meal.
right. Yeah, but I mean, fresh fruits and veggies are great. Like cucumber and cut fruit, and I also love to do like a chickpea pasta salad that is sort of good. It's good cold or room temp after it's been taken out for a little bit. And the chickpea pasta or lentil pasta is really nice because it's much higher in iron. So that's a way that you can get like an iron-rich food for your baby that, the rest of the family will enjoy as well without having to like bring, a cold piece of hamburger or something. So that's a nice one to have in there too.
Oh, wow. So we asked our audience for some questions to ask you. So are you ready if we give you some quick fire questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the first question is, how do I balance food groups for my growing baby and should I worry about it?
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit. And I think, again, it's kind of like to do your best to serve relatively balanced meals to your little one, paying particular attention to the iron-rich foods. There's so much focus in weaning on fruits and vegetables, and those are great and those are important. But in terms of what a baby actually needs, you could really make the argument that like the iron-rich foods are more important. So making sure that those are pretty much every time you offer food that something has iron in it. And then the vitamin C in the fruits and vegetables can like help with absorption, which is great. But really thinking about, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, what have you got some examples of iron-rich food? Because I think I know that red meat has got iron in it, but are there other high iron foods if red meat is something that you're not always going to want to buy or no, there are a number of other options if red meat is sort of like not something that your family eats. Two of my favorites are canned sardines are fantastic for babies and they're super high in iron. They're really affordable as well. And then canned shellfish like oysters and clams when your baby's ready for those are really high in iron as well. So those are great options. And then for those that aren't eating any animal products, like lentils and beans also have a decent amount. And that'll be absorbed better with a vitamin C rich food compared to like the animal foods. But eggs also have some, salmon has some, dark meat, poultry has some iron in it. In comparison to white meat, which really doesn't have a notable amount. So there are lots of different ways you can mix it together and not feel like red meat has to be the only way that you get it in. How would you serve? I mean, I'm cheating and putting my own quick fire question.
Sure.
In here. How would you serve sardines or oysters or clams to a baby? Because I would not know where to start there.
Yeah, so with the sardines, they come, you just like open up the tin and, there's like 6 of them sitting there. And for 6 to 9 months, you literally can just plop it right on the plate. It doesn't have to be cooked or anything. And babies, you'd be surprised that babies like really love it. Just like the whole thing plopped on there. And it's so great for parents because it's like you don't have to, it's not something you have to cook. You just like open the can and it's ready to go. And then oysters are great too, because it's a big enough, it's kind of like a handful size and it's really soft. So it's easy for them to kind of gum. And again, they're cooked in the can, so they don't carry the same risk that we always think about, foodborne illness with shellfish, with like mussels and that sort of stuff. But that's with raw shellfish, not with cooked. You don't have those same concerns with cooked. So
okay, that's right. That I was envisaging a baby with a shell trying to eat their oyster.
No,
I was like, I
didn't know. Clarification. Yeah, it'll be quite some time before that is like safe and approved. Yeah, so this is definitely operating with cooked stuff here.
Okay. No, I'm glad I asked that question.
Yeah.
So the next question we got asked was, how can I prevent picky? Can't get my words out. How can I prevent picky eating?
Yeah, and it's such a loaded question, because I think we've kind of gotten to the point where it's just like, oh, all toddlers are picky eaters, and that's the way it is. But I think it's really a combination of really pushing what you serve your baby, like to the best of your ability. Like, you don't have to drive yourself crazy here, but introducing them to a wide variety of foods and textures, and foods that get messy, foods that are crunchy, like just really the full gamut of things when they're little. It teaches little ones that food can be different all the time. So that they don't get stuck into like, well, I have to have this kind of bread with this topping cut in this sort of way, and they sort of becoming really rigid about it. So just having babies turn into toddlers that are like, food can be different all the time. And sometimes mom makes it this way, and sometimes grandma makes it that way. And that's just all very normal. And then the other thing that I think arguably is even more important than that is not pressuring little ones. And it's so easy as a parent, because we want the best for them. And so we know as a parent, like, that we want them to eat the broccoli, and we want them to eat the salmon, or whatever, we deem as nutritious foods. But often, like, the more we pressure as parents and kind of put those foods on a pedestal, the more toddlers resist to that. Babies won't so much, but once they get to the point, that very normal toddler phase of pushing boundaries, having their own opinions about things, then that's where the pressure really starts to backfire. So trying to remember, starting when they're a baby and then continuing through the toddler years, that it's like, if you don't like what is, that these are our options for dinner, and there's something on the plate that you generally like, and we'll eat again at dinner if you don't like lunch, and just sort of being very neutral about the whole thing, and trying not to make it a battle over what they are and aren't eating. So it's sort of like,
and I think,
boundaries without too much pressure, I guess.
Yeah, and I think if you've had to adapt, create a whole bespoke meal, and you haven't adapted what you're eating,
right,
it's very hard to stay neutral, because you're emotionally invested more in that, because you've spent more of your time. So I think being able to adapt a meal without you having to put in as much effort, on your time, making it simple for yourself, actually probably reduces the pressure that you feel, that how much you want them to eat it, because you're just, you've set your bar a bit lower as well.
It's
so
like,
I think
this is dinner, and it's like some nights you'll like it more than others, and and I think as long as there's something on the plate, particularly for toddlers who are more reliant on the solid food than a baby is, that there's something on the plate that you are confident they'll eat, just sort of like out of kindness, because they need to fill their belly and whatever. Then beyond that, you can sort of stick to, well, this is what we're having for dinner. Because like, once you start, it's just such a slippery road for parents once they start of like, oh, well, you didn't like this. Okay, I'll make you a grilled cheese, afterwards. Or cheese. I think you guys call them cheese toasties or something. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm impressed you know that.
Yeah. I can't remember. I heard that somewhere. Maybe I think it actually was Jamie Oliver. I was like, what's a cheese toastie? We call it grilled cheese over here, but whatever, some kid-friendly like type food of like, once you start that and sort of give them that open door, then it's really, really hard to rein them back into like whatever you're serving everyone else for dinner. So,
yeah. And I think almost like you probably get quite far down that road before you realise, you know, because it's
Right. Right.
I think you could go a long way before you sort of like, I am now again cooking 2
Right.
meals, except I'm
Right.
doing it after. So I think that's a really useful tip.
Yeah.
Okay, that wasn't the quickest fire. We managed to make that one last quite a long time. So so the next question is, I'm worried my baby's not eating enough and they look like they're just playing with their food. Should I be concerned about it?
Yeah, that's such a common question. And it's a little bit age specific. So the younger the baby, the closer the baby is to 6 months, the less concerning that is. So I think sometimes parents will reach out to me and they're in week 1 of baby-led weaning. And they're like, oh my gosh, my daughter's like not eating anything. She's just playing with it and just getting really concerned about that. And that's so normal in the early days, for them to just be playing with it, making a mess of it. Maybe some gets to the mouth. And that's all very, very normal. And then we do want to sort of slowly see them start to transition to becoming more proficient at bringing the food to their mouth, actually kind of gumming some of it, getting it in there, as they get a little bit older. So we usually want to see them making that shift kind of in the 8 to 9 month mark. So yeah, it's a longer journey than parents usually think of them getting to the point where they're actually picking up food, eating it, and swallowing it. But yeah, if you're kind of getting to the 10, 11 month mark and you see zero progress in the right direction, then that would be something to check in with your pediatrician just to make sure. But in general, it takes longer than parents think, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that was certainly something I don't think I was prepared for. I just assumed that I would put them in the high chair and they'd be able to do it. And it's sort of only now retrospectively that I think, why on earth did I think that? Because I think you see pictures of babies on on an advert and they're all smiling and eating, and you don't appreciate that those babies are either quite considerably older than your baby when you're starting. And developmentally, they're on a different trajectory potentially. So every child is different. So I think it's really important to just look at what your baby's doing and judge it from there. So I think that's a really great answer. So the final question was, can you recommend a healthy summer treat?
No, I kind of like alluded to it earlier of like chickpea pasta salad is a really fun one that like everybody enjoys. And then another one that we love is, you can do like a big wedge of watermelon with, a squeeze of lime on it is really, really good and kind of like a different flavor. And then for adults, you can like sprinkle some salt on there as well. And that one's, really yummy for everyone to enjoy as well, just to kind of jazz up your watermelon a little bit.
And what about size-wise for little ones? If you're like a big...
I mean, you could if you don't have to, but like just a big enough piece that not too much is gonna, so that they can kind of gum it and work on it themselves. Yeah.
Oh, amazing! I actually want that now. Yeah. I want that now. Yeah. It sounds delicious. So we ask this to all our guests. What is your top tip to make mealtime adventures more fun for both parents and babies?
I think the most important thing is we can get so in the weeds about like what they're eating and the nutrition and the this, that, and the other. And the most important thing is, whenever possible, is to eat together with your baby when you can, and really make it like a fun part of your day so that they see you enjoying eating, they enjoy eating and like watching you as well, and just creating a really positive association with eating together as a family. Because at the end of the day, like that's so much more important than kind of like the nuances of specific foods and stuff, is that we should enjoy sharing a meal together as part of what we do every day.
The ethos, the ethos of eating and a mealtime is bigger than the sum of the parts.
Yes,
I think
100%.
I love that. Yeah, I love that answer, and I think that really does ground babies and toddlers into sort of, it's so communal, isn't it? It's like bringing that community in, your family community, and then extending out into the wider world with friends and relatives and all those other things. It's sort of, I think it's such a lovely thing to share.
Right.
Especially as a bit of a foodie myself. Yeah. It's, sharing a meal is quite a big deal in our house.
Yes, absolutely.
So final question, we're nearly at the end. We as parents are always hugely busy and we rarely have time to sit down and to have a nice warm drink. And I know that your little babies are asleep in bed at the moment. They've slept soundly. I think we've got away with it. So what would your choice of a Bibabo be? Because we're about to send you our Love Curiosity mug as a thank you for coming on our show.
Thank you so much.
So we want to know what you put in it.
Gosh, my favorite, every morning I have a really, really strong coffee with a splash of cream and a little bit of stevia. It's sort of pretty simple drink, but it's like my little happy place in the morning that I always carve out
get you
time
going.
for. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, listen, Christina, it's been so wonderful to talk to you, and thank you so much for coming on and being such a fabulous guest. And as I say, we're going to be sending your Wonder is for the Curious mug, and I hope you get to enjoy many coffees with your cream and stevia in it. And please let us know when you use it.
Yes.
And for any of our listeners, please check out and subscribe to our social channels on Instagram and Facebook to keep up to date with the latest episodes. And if you'd like to watch the full video podcast, it will be available on the website. And if you've only got time for the audio recording, it will be on Spotify, Apple and Amazon. And if anybody wants to get in touch and let us know what they would like us to talk with our next guest, if they've got a guest they'd like us to speak with, please let us know and get in contact. But thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.
Bibado, Bibado.